How are you, mate? Hello, troops. This is an audio level. This is a testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Hello, Gordo. Hello, Drew. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All good. Howdy. What's happening? It is bloody hot. Which is. I've gone the cool, sleek design. He's gone the. G'day, Tim. All good to go? We've taken a small step forward in the quest for a safer Queensland, with Parliament passing breach of bail as an offence for young offenders. Now, that is one very small step forward, but it's one that we have been fighting for 2 years. So we have to acknowledge the work that Queenslanders have done in that, and they have been relentless. People on the front line, like our police, who have asked us to take up the fight. And whilst there are many things in the Youth Justice Act that need amending into the future, that is one step forward, and one that we have to acknowledge is a win for Queenslanders, and a win that has been secured for opposition. It is only the first of many steps, though, and we need to embed consequences for action in the Act. We need to unshackle the judiciary and make detention as a last resort removed from that Act. And we need gold standard early intervention. And we won't stop, because Queenslanders are telling us that they want their community back. They want to feel safe again in their own home, and we'll continue to pursue that hard. I do want to make some comments very, very briefly about another payroll debacle, but I'll ask the Deputy Leader to also say some words on that. But I just want to make the point that here we go again, and it's something that I'm sure Queenslanders will look at and just shake their head, that over a decade after the original payroll bungle, we're again back in this scenario. And it's not the cost of the payments, it's the cost of secrecy from a government that just will never be honest with people, and that costs Queenslanders. And for the fact that the government has known about this for years, and yet they haven't told health workers. So imagine the anxiety today of a health worker finding out that, oh my goodness, there's something wrong with my pay again. That's the last thing they need after all they've been through. And yet the government wouldn't say a thing, because in their mind it's all about how can we manage the media on this, and how can we keep this under lock and key, and maybe it can just slide through without people ever hearing about it. That's just no way to treat people, and it's no way to run a government. And it is proof that a government is reaching the end of its life when it no longer cares about the people that it's supposed to represent, when everything is about how things look rather than how they are. And when governments are obsessed with their image rather than worry about the people who are there serving Queenslanders, that costs Queenslanders far more than an overpayment. There is a cost for governments that don't value transparency, and that cost is felt in frontline service delivery every single day. Jarrod.
Thank you, David. Good morning. Jarrod Bleijie, Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Well, every day the Palaszczuk government lingers on, reminds us more and more of the dying days of the Bleijie government. The only difference is Anna has a few more letters after it this time round. Learning today that we are now embarking in Queensland on another health payroll bungle would send shivers down the spines of every health worker this touched and traumatised all those years ago. I am so concerned when we read reports today that this has happened. What I'm more angry about is just hearing Yvette D'Arth confirm that the government have known about this since 2020. What happened in 2020? In October 2020, we had an election. If it is the case, this government, the Palaszczuk government, knew about this new IT bungle in health and payroll bungle since before the last election, they deliberately hid it. They deliberately kept it secret from Queenslanders before an election. Who was the health minister? Stephen Miles, the Deputy Premier. This government should have come clean. They have been in power for 8 years now. They are in their third term, but they are so arrogant, they believe they can do no wrong, they believe they can keep all this stuff secret, Queenslanders should have known about this. Now, some may say that the amount that the government are talking about is not in the grand scale as it was with the last Labor health IT bungle. But we're still talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. What's more worryingly, I can remember standing in this place over 10 years ago on behalf of health workers in my own electorate who were traumatised and continue to be traumatised by the bungle. And now we hear it's happening again. There is so much in common with the dying days of the Bleijie government compared to the Palaszczuk government. It's just disgraceful. As I said, every day the Palaszczuk government lingers on, it reminds us of the dying days of the Bleijie government, other than the Anna has a few more letters after it. I want to make some comments before I hand back to the leader, David Crisafulli, with respect to the Gabba and the Olympics. We saw this week, we as an opposition went in to ask questions of the government to explain the costings, be upfront with Queenslanders, how it went. The Gabba redevelopment for the Olympic 2032 went from $1 billion to $2.7 billion. Our Brisbane Live is now $2.5 billion. We asked the Premier what costings did she rely on to come up with the figure, and we heard nothing. We heard on Wednesday night that it was issues that dealt with disability compliance and the lack of female toilets in the original plan. And then on Tuesday we heard it was Green Star 6 energy rating, and we're not dealing with 2020 money but 2032 money. Like, I heard every excuse under the sun. All we want, and all Queenslanders want, is transparency and openness with respect to these billions of dollars of expenditure. It is not good enough for Anastasia, because of her ego and making the Olympics all about her, to simply dismiss these questions. They are legitimate questions. It is not a blank cheque for the Olympics. It is not Palaszczuk's monopoly money we're dealing with. We are dealing with Queenslanders' money. Palaszczuk promised the people of Queensland this was going to be a cost-neutral Olympics. It's going to be a different Olympics that you've never seen before. Well, based on what we're seeing at the moment, nothing's changed, because we've already got huge 170% blowouts on infrastructure that we have seen with other Olympic Games. So I say to the Premier, did you break another election promise? Did you break another promise when you stood on the world stage and said this is what it's going to cost? In the $7 billion in stadium infrastructure, that doesn't even include roads and rail upgrades. We were promised, people of Queensland were promised by the Premier, we are going to get infrastructure that we've never seen before in Queensland. We're going to get infrastructure like you've never seen, and that we have been waiting for years, like the rail, proper rail on the Sunshine Coast, heavy passenger rail. None of that's been announced, not a dollar. So we are still absolutely 100% concerned about these blowouts, and we are really concerned that the government, despite repeated questions, despite a motion in Parliament, have not even been able to release one piece of paper that shows how the Gabba went from $1 billion to $2.7 billion. David.
Opposition Leader, can I ask, has the government learned anything from the Mason Jet Li incident, considering what they knew about Kerry-Ann Collins?
Peter, I watched a story last night and it moved me, and I bet you it moved Queenslanders as well. And the similarities with little Mason Jet Li are eerie. And to me it just shows that they haven't done what they said they were going to do. And I just don't think the lessons have been learnt. And to hear reports of a child being shopped around for a phone, that's not the Queensland we should live in, and that's not a fit and proper person in the eyes of anyone. And I'm sorry, but systems are put in place to protect the vulnerable, and when a government says they're going to do something, that should actually count for something. And kids aren't a commodity. They're our most special asset, and they should be treated like that.
How does it make you feel as a father?
As a human, when the Mason Jet Li case came to the fore with Queenslanders, that really moved people, in a way that they've never thought before. And to the government's credit, at the time, they said, OK, we see the magnitude of this and things will change. Well, what changed? What changed? So, well, what's a life worth? Can somebody be held accountable? Can improvements be made so another child doesn't have to go through it? Will we be back here again? I think there wouldn't be a Queenslander today who wouldn't have seen your story that didn't feel sick in the guts and want to know that something will happen, that someone will be held accountable and something will change. Because when little Mason died, we were promised something would change. And a father had to bury 2 daughters. So not much has changed. And the warning signs were there. And when you hear reports of workers being overloaded, of systems not working properly, and the most vulnerable in our community being left in a place that they shouldn't have been, well, surely that counts for something, and surely change has to come. Surely.
You, opposition leader, will you be calling on a full inquiry into this incident?
Well, the report needs to be released in full, because if the government is serious about saying that someone will be held accountable, and if the government's serious about saying that the system will change, well then that report has to be released in full. Someone has to be held accountable, and this can't happen again. And there will never be perfection in a system. But I would like to think that we can do a hell of a lot better than what we've seen in this case. There are so many red flags, and when you listen to the story, you just see that there were multiple opportunities where these little girls could have been taken out of harm's way. And when the case with little Mason happened, we thought that was a line in the sand. It wasn't. And here we go again.
How concerning is it that they haven't seen that report yet?
Who would benefit other than the government for that report not being released? The family won't benefit from it being under lock and key, and the Queensland taxpayers don't benefit, parents don't benefit. I'm increasingly becoming alarmed that every single decision the government makes is through the prism of how it will look in the eyes of the public rather than what is right. And it's like compassion has just walked out the door. These were 2 innocent kids, and there were so many red flags, and nothing has changed, and it appears no one's going to be held accountable. And we just have to accept that that's just the new way of governing in Queensland. Well, I don't accept it, and I bet you Queenslanders don't accept it. And if you believe in ministerial accountability, someone will be held accountable. But what is more important is that the system that allowed a caseworker to be overloaded, the system that allowed no multiple checks, the system that allowed people to ring every day for a fortnight and ring the bell, nothing was picked up. So if that system can't be fixed, well then why do we have governments? Why do we have people in charge of departments? Do we just accept that as the new way of doing business in Queensland? I wouldn't accept that. And leadership would be the Premier doing the same. And again, the most important thing is that the system is fixed. That far outweighs about the future of a politician. That is the most important thing. But under Westminster government, someone also has to be held accountable. You can't continue to have crisis after crisis, and the government will say, OK, well, we're introducing this. But at some point, they've been there now for 3 terms. It'll be a decade at the time in the next election. They'll be seeking a 4th term. At some point, the government has to acknowledge they've had enough time to fix these systems. They've had enough warning signs, and yet we continue to go back in every failure in service delivery, and in this one, the failure is the most important of all. It's the life of a kid, 2 of them in fact.
Just go back to the payroll. The health minister said that these errors, I guess, discrepancies in payroll would have been happening under the opposition, happening under the LNP rather than they were in power.
Yeah.
Is it something that, I guess, both sides probably should have picked up? What's your response? Did you acknowledge that it was happening under the LNP?
Yeah, I guess if 8 years isn't enough to do something, and if not having the tenacity to admit that there was a problem in 2020 and be up front, I think Queenslanders are starting to grow a little tired about that. If there are errors dating back to when the payroll debacle happened, nearly a decade and a half ago, and they weren't fixed over that period of time, of course every Queenslander would want to see that. But for nearly 3 years, the government's had this information in their hands, and yet health workers have to wake up today and be confronted with it and revisit all of those demons again. Wouldn't good ministerial accountability have been communicating to every single staff member to say, hey, this issue has been flagged with us, nothing to worry about, this is how we're handling it, and there'll be no impact on you? Wouldn't that be the way that a good and open government would do? But no, because there's the prospect that might lead to a bad media story, the easier way is, well, let's just keep on trying to swirl around and let's try and see if we can keep it out of the media. I just don't share that view. And for the minister to stand up and say, this may have been happening 9 years ago and therefore I'm not to blame, well, how much time does this government need to fix the failures in service delivery? So they've nearly had 10 years. Will 14 years be enough, or do they need 18 years? I think Queenslanders are growing tired about it always being someone else's fault. Good government is about accepting responsibility and driving change. And I'm a big believer in KPIs and points of accountability. I'm not a big believer in hiding things from people.
Just on the gap, I know all your points you made about the funds, $1 billion, $2.7 billion.
Yeah.
Construction is due to start in 2026. Given the election in 2024, what will you do with the gap?
Well, we're certainly not going to accept that a project can go from $1 billion to $2.7 billion, and the excuse is that it involves compliance issues for things like disability services. I don't believe for one moment that the original bid with $1 billion didn't factor in those things. If it did, that is negligence of the highest order. This is just the result of a government that just can't manage money. And if it was just this one project, you'd say, well, okay, fair income, maybe. But every single project this government has overseen has blown out. We're talking about over $2 billion on Cross River Rail, over $500 million for the light rail and the Coomera Connector. And in the case of the Coomera Connector, it's a couple of years late and we've lost a couple of lanes and it's still increased by over $500 million. There is just an inability to plan and deliver a project. And I don't cop that something can go from $1 billion to $2.7 billion in less than 2 years, and the public aren't even justified what the original business case was. So we're not going to let the government off the hook on that, and I think that's fair and reasonable. If a promise is made on the world stage that something would be $1 billion, and now we're accepting that that should be 170% higher, we will not for one moment allow the government to get a blank cheque on that. No chance in the world. Well, I don't accept that a project can go from $1 billion to $2.7 billion and there can't be questions asked. I just don't accept that. Well,
what will you do if you're Premier in 2024? Will you go ahead with a $2.7 billion project?
Let me just clear a couple of things up, because there was a pretty juvenile release put out under the heading of the second most important office in this state, and it was the most puerile release I've seen. Let's be really clear. Every one of those projects will be delivered. Every single one of them. One of the projects that was on that list from the Deputy Premier has even been finished, so that should give an indication of the sincerity and brain power going on in that. But let me be really clear. Every one of those projects will be delivered. The difference is I'm not going to allow this Mark Bailey approach that things can constantly blow out with any point of accountability. And I can tell you what a government can do. A government can get experts in the field to get early contractor involvement and do that properly. Ministers can actually oversee something the way that they should and administer a department. When you're looking at supply chains, you actually talk to people and lock things in, drive prices down like that every single day. And if ministers can't do it, they won't be able to be ministers. Mark Bailey would have about as much chance of being a minister after this period of time and this many failures if I was Premier as a snowflake lasting out on that footpath today. Not a chance. How many second chances does someone have to get? I'm sorry, I do not accept a project can go from $1 billion to $2.7 billion and you don't ask questions. That is nonsensical.
So are you committing to build the gathering?
You bet. Every one of those projects, and let me just remove that nonsense from Stephen Miles, but I'm not going to accept that every project has to double and triple in price.
So
I'm not going to accept that.
If you are committing to build it, will you look at scaling it back?
Nope.
Try to find cost savings?
We will, well, we'll be looking to make sure that things are built on time and on budget. Absolutely. And one of the main reasons why projects keep blowing out in this state is because they can't be project managed to time. And every time you delay a project, the cost increases. So if you are unable to sign a contractor on the Coomera Connector and it blows out by 2 years, well, that impacts your ability to deliver that on time. And that's the reason why projects blow out. So let me assure Queenslanders, and in the case of some of them, including the hospitals, I'm not convinced that we can't even pull those medical facilities forward a little bit. And I think Queenslanders are yearning for that. But I'm not going to accept blowouts of 170% without someone being held accountable, and I'm not going to write blank cheques like the Premier does and just say, well, that's because of cost escalation. Can you imagine a young couple goes to a builder today and they find their dream house and land package and it's $1 million? They go to the bank, they've got their loan ready, they go home, they tell their parents it's the most important day of their life, and then they go back a year later and the builder says, hey, it's actually $2.7 million. Oh well, righto. Well, that's what we're asking taxpayers to accept, that something that was $1 billion can now be $2.7 billion in less than 2 years. That's not escalation, that's an inability to manage a project, and we're not going to cop it. And Queenslanders aren't going to cop it. And at a time when they are looking at every penny because they are struggling to keep a roof over their head, they deserve a government that treats their money with the same respect that they treat theirs. End of story.
I think your points there, and regardless of how we got here, we're now at a point where it is 2.7.
But I don't accept that, Tim, because I haven't seen the original costings and I haven't seen these costings.
But regardless of what happened,
Well,
how we got here.
but how is that regardless?
In the next election, you
Yeah.
take over and you're taking over a government that is committed to a $2.716 billion.
Well, no. We'll be taking over from if the good people of Queensland give us the opportunity, we'll be taking over from a government that said they're going to redevelop the facility to enable a very important event to be staged. Now, the original commitment was $1 billion and it's now $2.7 billion. So the facility has got to be delivered and it's got to be world class. But I'm not going to take the Anastasia Palaszczuk model that you just write cheques without planning and delivering a project and delivering value for money. I just will not accept it.
So when you say you don't accept it, what are you not accepting, the price tag?
No, I haven't seen I've neither seen the original design. Now, he moved a motion on the floor of Parliament, which I thought was fairly simple, which was show the original costings, and we got some juvenile response. So I do not accept that from a project that was $1 billion is now $2.7 billion, and we can't see either the original or the current costings. I don't accept that.
So the question I guess I'm asking is if you get into office,
A world-class facility will be built.
together, even if it still costs $2.716 billion, the contract's signed, you can't get out of your commitment to that.
Tim, I can't be any more clear. I haven't seen the original costings and I haven't seen their current costings, and I'm not going to accept either. I'm going to be. I want to see what was their original design. I want to see what the current design is, and I want to see the timeline for delivery, the methodology, whether or not the contractor What model it will be delivered in, I don't know any of those. And by the look of it, neither does the government. So we are not going to write blank cheques. We are going to deliver world-class infrastructure, and we are going to deliver world-class games. And it's not just going to be about stadium either, by the way. It's got to be about improving people's lives every day in every part of Queensland. Road, rail, a 20-year tourism vision. If you're not delivering that for the Olympics, all it is a big party for people to go and have champagne. That's not what the Olympics needs to be about. The Olympics about creating once-in-a-generation infrastructure. And part of that is sporting stadiums. That is part of it. But I'm not going to accept that a project can go from $1 billion to $2.7 billion and questions aren't asked.
The Premier once said that she was going to do the games for $5 billion.
We were told it was cost neutral. The only thing that's in neutral is the engine, that nothing's moving aside from the price that's going like that. It's diabolical at the moment. There has been... We have lost nearly 2 years, and all we've got to show for it is the Premier taking control of every aspect as though somehow it's running a giant party and it's a cabal. That's not how it needs to work. All three levels of government need to get in, and it needs to be about delivering infrastructure on time and on budget to make the lives of Queenslanders in every part of the state better every day. And that's not just for the event. It's got to be the roads they drive on to take their kids to school. It's got to be the tourism opportunity in far north Queensland and Western Queensland, where people keep coming back for a generation after falling in love with Queensland. It's got to be about rail to connect our cities right across the board.
I understand you're committing to building and you also say you don't accept the $2.7 billion price tag. Do you understand?
But I don't accept either, Tim, because I haven't seen either, and neither should you.
Yes.
And if the Premier had any ounce of being able to govern, neither would she. Now, I don't know what the original $1 billion design was. Now, I do know about comparisons of other stadium across the world, and this one would be the most expensive ever built. And if you have a look at what's been built in other parts of the country, this would be the most expensive. So I want to know what's in it.
$2.716 billion. If this government is re-elected, it's not getting any cheaper. If you're elected, you're saying you're committing to building the stadium, you're not committing to the price tag as such. You see what some people may interpret that as you're looking to scale it back or slash costs.
Not if the government can show us the details in it. So we haven't made any commitment other than to deliver things on time and on budget. So we still haven't seen what the original $1 billion costing is. We still haven't seen the $2.7 billion. And I'm not going to make promises that I can't keep. But I'll always tell people when we make a commitment to do something, people will be held accountable to it. So this could all be erased in one moment. The Premier could give you the document that shows what was in the $1 billion and how that's changed to the $2.7 billion, and there could be a discussion on how something can increase by 170% in less than 2 years.
So finally, what is your commitment on the Gabba Stadium?
To deliver a world-class venue and to deliver infrastructure that Queenslanders can be proud of. To deliver a games that will be on time and on budget, and to make sure that the infrastructure that comes from it isn't just for one part of the state and isn't just for one period. It has to be generational infrastructure for every part of Queensland every day. And the games itself has to be one small component of that, otherwise Queenslanders will lose faith in it, and that is not what we want to see. We want Queenslanders to be excited about the opportunities that can come from this, and I can assure you that infrastructure is a key part of that, and ministers in a government that I lead will be held accountable for the price tag and the timeline on the things they have to deliver.
Just on Mackay Hospital, we've had two families come forward in as many days alleging neglect. Does the hospital need to go through an overhaul?
We are increasingly becoming concerned with the access to medical services throughout central Queensland and the minister's constant failure to listen to the calls in that area. And we've raised on the behalf of people of CQ issues from the lack of maternity services through to some of the most horrendous allegations in Mackay that we were told we were scaremongering. I'm just going to make the point really clearly. Queenslanders deserve a world-class health system no matter where they live, and that involves getting access to world-class services and being able to have a baby where, when and how you want to have one in the region you live. And we are increasingly becoming concerned that in that central Queensland area, it's becoming an area that the government has put in the too hard basket, and they are not listening to the whistleblowers who are coming forward. And we asked a question just last week, just this week, about more allegations, and we are concerned that the government is following the same playbook it did when we raised those original concerns in Mackay.
Thanks very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.